So before I get to the twist ending and explain why it was such a brilliant way to end things, I want to talk about the ending monologue about social media and why it seems to say that Generation Y, Millennials, and Generation Z were obsessed with social media, not just because we're the most narcissistic generation, but because we're the most judged generation. And it is true that never before has popularity been so important, not just in high school, but in your whole life now. And sometimes back in the olden days, I don't know, olden days, 20 years ago, if you were unpopular in high school, people could say, look, it's not a big deal. It's 4 years, 8 years, however you want to say it, and then move on with your life. It'll be about career and family, and things like popularity will be so unimportant. It's increasingly less true. Now things like social media and how many Twitter followers you have or Instagram followers, now it's almost a lifelong thing. And even if you go into a profession like being a writer, people are going to ask you, what's your reach? How many followers do you have? So it's increasingly not true that popularity is only something that matters in high school. Back in the old days when manufacturing is a big thing and people are in factories and an assembly line, it doesn't matter as much how well you are able to get along with people, how many friends you have, but in the service economy, everything, whether you're a server in a restaurant or whether you're working for a company, people care about how well you're able to interact with the public, how well you're able to interact with groups, and this aspect of likability that's very similar to how popular you are in high school. Not the same, but very similar. So it only becomes this lifelong thing, and that's why there can be this sense of hopelessness. If you're unpopular in high school, you get the sense that you're going to be unpopular for the rest of your life, and that's increasingly important. And this ruthless competition and popularity contest, social media, as well as facilitating this contest, the show seems to say it offers a kind of escape, and characters like Kevin, who's unfortunately not very popular, he's able to escape and have this persona that he creates where he affects an accent, seems like he's from another century, trying different exotic teas, and this character kind of shields himself from this harsh judgment. And even if people judge the character, there's this kind of sense that, well, they're not really judging me, and they're not really judging the real me. So it provides this kind of escape. Also, it provides a way to experiment and test things out, and the show seems to say that experimenting online doesn't have as many harmful consequences as the same experimentation in your real life. Now that's debatable, internet's kind of permanent, but the show also explores the idea that maybe you can never scrub all the bad things you did from the internet, but there's just so much information overload that you can almost overwhelm with other information and create the same hiding effect. So there's a funny Office show on The Office, Michael Scott's like, how do you unsay something? You can't put words back in your mouth. But what he can do is spread a bunch of other rumors, so eventually people don't know what's true. So yeah, it's true that you can never erase things from the internet, but maybe because attention spans and there's always the next thing and there's just so much out there, you can hide it in a different way. And this kind of experimentation that social media allows, it ties with this notion of self-expression that is so different than traditional high school hierarchy where you have these cliques and these packs, and belonging is this big thing and you really want to link up your style to whatever the pack is. It's starting to shift now to where you have this kind of ruthless individuals all competing, but also individuals trying to create this persona, and it's self-expression rather than just trying to latch yourself onto a group. Sometimes that's a little outdated. Now you have everybody as individuals, and it's like, just ruthless, individualistic capitalism transplanted on the high school ecosystem. So anyways, that's what I think the monologue at the end meant. The twist ending, and I'll explain why I liked it so much. It turns out that the first thing that happens is Grayson, he's at this prestigious school and he kind of harasses another student, but at the very same time, a popular basketball player also does a much more sustained campaign of harassment. Grayson ends up getting the book thrown at him and he gets thrown out of school and expelled and has to start working at the mall. The basketball student gets a slap on the wrist and now he's off at UCLA. Now Grayson is very mad about this double standard, starts thinking the whole world, it's all hypocrites, and he wants to teach people a lesson. So what he does is, first of all, he's working at the mall where he fixes people's phones. So he gets a phone, takes some of the photos and stuff and creates this online persona of Brooke to catfish and trick all these people who he wants to get revenge on. He tricks them into entering these relationships back and forth, and it's so interesting. He's able to use all this online data, that the social media, us putting our lives out there. Not only does the internet allow you to reach out to people and potentially harm people, but it also lets you study and spy on people, so then you can, create this story based on the things you know about them to effectively gain their trust. So that's one reason why it's so terrifying. It was really interesting that Grayson, he's the tech guy fixing phones, and he uses his position for his nefarious schemes, because increasingly you see this trope used in horror movies where the tech person who's fixing your computer, fixing your phone, they have a lot of power over you, and it's in some way similar to a mechanic. When your car breaks down, you're in a very vulnerable position, needing them to be honest with you. Usually you don't know a lot about cars, just like you don't know a lot about computers, so there's this kind of asymmetrical relationship. Now, with a mechanic, there's no stereotype of like the evil mastermind mechanic who's gonna do nefarious things, but increasingly people are scared of robots, people are scared of big tech, so this idea of someone who knows a lot about computers and is kind of knows a lot more about them than you and could potentially manipulate this to their advantage, it's a great horror trope that I'm seeing more and more. So it was interesting that they utilized that. So anyways, Grayson, he creates this online persona of Brooke, messages 45 different people. Now some of these people seemed a bit random, but some of these people he had specific grievances against, like the teacher who he messaged, that was the teacher who turned him in for his harassment of that other person. So certain people he had grievances against, and he messages them, gains their trust, and gets them to send incriminating photos of themselves to him. Now he threatens and he says, look, I'm gonna release these photos unless you go do these pranks. Now Drew, who sent the diaper photos, actually refuses, and that's why the photos of him get leaked. Everyone else, the basketball player, he does the piñata prank with Kurt Vonnegut as the piñata. Jenna, the person who pretended to be Kendall Jenner's best friend, she does the t-shirt shooting prank. The teacher does the prank in the students' lounge. Now what's important about that is the school, they want this to be wrapped up, so they try to use Kevin as just the fall guy, the patsy, and then this other prank, which happens after Kevin supposedly confesses and couldn't have done this, they try to hush this up. So that's why you get the hot janitor getting sent to the other school, and this tries to get brushed under the rug. And then Kevin was the perpetrator of the original brownout. That makes sense. We knew that because he sat beside his nemesis to get a better view before it all went down. He pushed that other teacher's food out of the way because he didn't want them to get hurt. So it perfectly made sense that he was the original perpetrator. But the twist that there was someone else behind the scenes, it's such a good twist. One, because it's very topical and timely. Apparently, you know, you read articles about, there's whole chat rooms on the dark web where people just, this is what they do. They manipulate people, they gain people's trust by pretending to be someone they're not online, get incriminating photos, and then make them do increasingly humiliating things just for their own amusement. And then they actually swap stories on these chat rooms. And you think, why doesn't the FBI just shut them down? But oftentimes these chat rooms, they'll be smart and they'll say, to join, you have to submit evidence that you've done this to someone else, and it's hard for the FBI or law enforcement to actually, you know, obviously they can't do it in real life, and it's hard for them to fake it. Now, the Silk Road, notorious online marketplace, the FBI actually faked an assassination. So an FBI agent was trying to gain the trust of the supposed owner of the site, and the owner pretended to be a hitman. The owner said, look, I want you to take out this old business associate, and the FBI actually pretended and set up this like fake assassination. So the FBI can do certain very, you know, gray area stuff like that. I also love the idea that not everyone that Grayson reached out to immediately responded, but the fact that he reached out to so many people, eventually enough people are gonna respond. It reminded me of this book called Think of a Number. Now, in the book, someone's trying to scam people, and what they do is they send a letter to someone that says, I want you to think of a number in your head, any number. And then they send another letter that matches up with exactly that number that the person thought of. And immediately the people are spooked because they think, how could someone send me a letter that says think of a number, I think of a number, and then they send me another letter that guesses that exact number. But it turns out how the person's doing it is they just send thousands of letters with thousands of random numbers, and eventually if you send out enough of these, a few of them you're gonna get right. So this person getting the letter, they think they're the only one who's in this exchange, but really they don't know about the 99% of other times that the person got it exactly wrong. So just an interesting how with enough repetition and with enough, you know, big data and just doing something over and over and over again, you can get these results that seem like magic even though it's just repetition. And then it's also really interesting, some of the characters who corresponded with Grayson, they said, this is the first time in my life I've ever felt someone really listened to me, and this is the most real interaction I've ever had with someone. And it's ironic because it's, in some sense, the most fake interaction they've ever had. No part of this interaction was real or genuine. But when someone is not genuine and they can tell you exactly what you want to hear, they can in some sense seem more real than reality. And that's really dangerous when you have bad actors in the world who their entire life is trying to sell you something and just crafting this perfect product. it can seem like that's the actual real reality. And then when you actually go and just experience life, suddenly it seems like this is fake, and the only real thing is this thing that's actually really harmful, because the person who's feeding you this fantasy isn't really genuine. And then last thing, I thought it was interesting how it seems to be a critique a bit on the whole true crime genre and these kind of investigative documentaries that people love so much. I don't know why people love it. I think some sense it's this technique where you see something in one episode from one angle, from one suspect being the perpetrator, and then the next episode it switches and you see the same events, but suddenly it's this new perspective, and people just love that kind of sense that there's different perspectives. And in season 1 we never even found out, and we just had all these different competing storylines, and different people are probably gonna have different opinions of who they settle on depending on your own prejudices. But it also shows how, is it really the people that watch these and the people that make them, is it just this kind of lurid curiosity, or do we actually care about having less of these things in the future, understanding the root cause, or do we just like it? And the documentary makers, they hurt a lot of people in season 1, and in season 2 we see, rather than just going directly to the police, they message the turd burglar beforehand, and he ends up releasing this incriminating stuff that had they just gone to the police. But no, they had, for the documentary or for whatever reason, they went to him first and end up hurting a lot of people. So in some sense, you watch it and you like the show, but then at the very end, the show seems to say, well, maybe you shouldn't like the show so much. Like, what does that say about us that we find shows like this so compelling? Anyways, I'll wrap it up. Comparing it to season 1, season 1 was funnier, more iconic. Jimmy Tatro is the actor they cast, was just brilliant casting. But season 2, I think, was... the issues they explored them in more depth, and they were serious. It was more mature. It was smarter. So really, surprisingly, almost even a better season. Not as enjoyable, but maybe a more important season. And I said the exact similar thing about BoJack season 5. I was like, oh, it wasn't as fun to watch, but so bold and daring, and in the choices it made. So I don't know, maybe it's just me getting in a rut of how I review shows, but I have good things to say. Positive review.